If you've been keeping up with the world lately, you've probably heard a lot of talk about plummeting birth rates. News articles and on YouTube, how most of us living in developed countries are heading towards huge population declines over the next 100 years. I even made a video myself already discussing the topic. As a quick reminder of the situation, in order for a society to sustain its population long term, it needs its birth rate to be a minimum of 2.1. However, in basically all Western nations, our birth rates are beneath this and in fact have been that way for the best part of the last 50 years. Things are especially bad in South Korea, which recorded a historical low birth rate of 0.84 last year, which has led to an extremely top-heavy population pyramid looking like this. Anyway, given all this coverage on the topic, you'd expect there'd be at least some talk about solving the problem by now. However, I've seen no such videos as of yet covering the solutions in depth. So, that's what I'm going to try achieve in this video. But first, in order to find a solution, we first need to take a look at the reasons for why our birth rates are so low as it stands. And luckily, we already have this data. According to polls, the 6 biggest factors for why people are choosing to not have children are 1. Believing one is too old to raise a child. 2. Not wanting to impact my lifestyle. 3. Too expensive. 4. Believing the world is overpopulated. 5. Not liking children. 6. Believing one does not have parental instincts. To simplify this, I believe we can divide all 6 of these factors into 2 broader categories: ignorance and selfishness. The ones on ignorance are easiest to debunk because, first of all, we'll be heading towards underpopulation soon if trends carry on as they are. And for those who don't believe me, although yes, our populations are currently increasing, the only reason they are, despite the low birth rates, is because people are getting older and immigration. But many would argue these will likely be unsustainable long term, especially when older people start dying off and foreign countries start to face their own birth rate collapses. Secondly, as for a person believing they don't have parental instincts, this is also irrational because if we map out every single one of your ancestors, including your non-human ancestors dating back to the first mammals 200 million years ago, you'll find they all had children, a completely unbroken chain, and raised them well enough to survive. Therefore, when a person believes they have no capacity to raise children, it goes completely against evolution. And in fact, the notion has only been propagated by educational institutions who tell women children are not important, but getting a PhD, sinking into 6-figure student debt, and becoming a corporate employee for 40 years is. Anyway, I know I might have sounded passive-aggressive there, but I believe the points are still valid. Ignorance is a big part for why people don't want children. Now, how about selfishness? Well, disliking children, complaining about the cost and impact they'll have on one's lifestyle are all self-explanatory. People are unwilling to sacrifice by eating out less, having a worse car, and working part-time in order to give birth to new life that they believe will only be a nuisance and cause trouble, because they would rather not make these sacrifices so they can supplement their own lifestyle. And as for the biggest factor of them all, being too old, this is simply a byproduct of these other selfish reasons. As it's quite clear, if someone spends most of their 20s at school, then 30s working a 9 to 5 to improve their lifestyle, by the time they put these things in place and feel is a good time to have children, it'll likely be too late because they'll be too old. Again, I know I might have sounded passive-aggressive while explaining, but once more I believe the points are still valid. Anyway, now we have a clear understanding of why people are choosing not to have kids, this leads to the next step. How do we tackle these so we can get modern couples to start raising families like they used to? Again, we'll start with ignorance. This should be the most easy to solve. We just need to educate people, preferably starting at high school, but then continually throughout their life by use of media and unbiased news platforms, about the state of our populations and the trajectories we're currently heading, the need for having children, and how more kids being born will benefit our economies in future as they replace us in work when we're retired. And lastly, it'll also be important to state the psychological benefits of children, especially for female mothers, and the evolution of how every single person has parental instincts handed down to them from their ancestors. So, hopefully this will be a start for clearing the widespread ignorance about having children. Now, how about tackling selfishness? This is perhaps the harder problem to solve because I believe at a fundamental level, 99.9% of people are plain selfish. And with regard to children, it seems a lot of people care more about themselves than what life they can bring into the world. However, when you combine this with the fact modern children are highly expensive liabilities, $250,000 liabilities to be specific, it is understandable for why many people are choosing not to have children anymore, or at the very least, not as many. So, to solve this problem, we need to make it a selfish decision for couples to have children. How would we do this? Well, it might seem obvious to just pay people to have kids. Write them a check for $250 and we'll see our population start growing in no time. However, this comes with its own sets of problems. First, where will this money come from? Undoubtedly, it'll come from tax increases, especially placed on those who never chose to have children. And this certainly wouldn't make them happy. And second, how can we ensure this money doesn't lead to perverse incentives? Don't underestimate this point, this is crucial. One of the most famous economic quotes of all time from Warren Buffett's right-hand man, Charlie Munger, is, "Show me the incentive, and I'll show you the outcome." In other words, whatever you or the state encourages people to do, through financial motives or tax breaks, it'll undoubtedly lead to more of that thing playing out in society. So, just thinking for a second, if the state starts writing $250,000 checks for anyone that has children, what do you think will start to happen? Well, people, even those that are in no position and unprepared to have kids, will start popping out children like crazy. What's more is they'll likely give little care or attention to the child because all they cared about was the $250. So we basically have a generation of undernourished kids being raised. Now, some people will say that the money shouldn't be handed over right away. Rather, it should be divided over 18 years as the child grows up. But then there's another problem. How would we ensure that the money actually gets to the child? Because what will most likely happen is the money will be sent straight to the mother, then she'll spend it on herself, and whatever's left, that's if there is any, will go to the child. It'd be no different to the 2008 housing benefit reform that happened in the UK, where, previously, housing benefit would go straight from the government to the landlords. The landlord would be happy because he got his money, and the tenant would be happy because they've gotten a roof over their head for free. The only person who isn't happy is the taxpayer funding the government. But then, in 2008, they changed all of that, which was the stupidest idea ever, by the way. So the housing benefit would instead go to the tenants, sit in their account for a month, most likely be spent, and then come the end of the month, whatever was left would go to the landlord. Unsurprisingly, this reform led to evictions skyrocketing and housing becoming a mess. Anyway, back to the handing money to parents for having children idea. Assuming a similar thing would happen with money being siphoned out from where it was supposed to go, the obvious question is, how can we fix this? How can we financially incentivize parents to have children, while simultaneously ensuring the benefits are received by said children? Well, to answer this, we first need to answer what are the biggest factors that ensure kids have a good upbringing. In my opinion, I would argue the biggest ones are 1. Both mum and dad being together and staying together until the kids grow up. 2. Kids are raised with proper nutrition, fed real food, not garbage. And 3. Kids have easy and plentiful access to sports, extracurricular activities, and in other words, they're involved with their community. So, now tying this in with the original question, how can we channel this to lead to these positive outcomes? The answer, I've already stated earlier. We must make it a selfish decision for parents to do so. But only this time with the added criteria, simultaneously making it so the parents have no other choice but to improve the upbringing of their children. Now, how would this look like? Well, I'll break down achieving the 3 goals one by one, starting with mum and dad being together and staying together. To ensure this happens, the government should give massive tax breaks to any couples that choose to have children. And when I say massive, I mean it. Not the punitive £252 per year reduction that currently exists in the UK, and only kicks in when one of the parents doesn't work. Instead, under my proposal, the tax breaks should get larger the more children the couple has. And if the couple splits up, the tax burden should go straight back to the way it was. This has to happen because it will incentivize couples to stay together. I'll repeat, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. However, unfortunately, in most countries today, the real system looks a lot more like this, where there are some government incentives for having children, but they are minuscule for the most part. The real pot of gold comes from having a no-fault divorce, tearing apart families, which is why the rate of single motherhood has exploded in the last 70 years. Unsurprisingly too, because if they're going to make it a financially viable option for the government providing benefits and the former husband paying child support, then of course you're going to see more of this playing out. Anyway, how about the second point, ensuring children are fed well and well fed? Childhood obesity is a massive problem in most developed countries, especially in lower income families. My country, the UK, is a fantastic example of this, where the rate of child obesity is twice as high in poor families than what it is in middle to upper income families. Why? The answer is because a lot of poorer families feed their kids terribly. They order greasy takeaways 2 or 3 times a week, feed their kids crisps, chocolate bars, cheap snacks, rarely ever cooking proper healthy meals. Anyone who lives in the UK knows this is true. So, how can we incentivize families to feed their kids properly? Here's 2 ideas. 1. Provide the education to parents on how to cook proper meals. And 2. Provide food stamps that allows free or minimal cost purchase of healthy foods like chicken, fruit, fish, nuts, vegetables, and so on. That is only available for intact couples with children. Now, a system like this already exists in the US but fails for 2 main reasons. 1. Eligibility is based on income, which means there are disproportionately more single mothers receiving the benefits than intact couples. So again, there is that incentive to tear apart families in order to receive the benefit. And more importantly too, the food stamps can be used to purchase any food products, including junk food. These 2 maps are unbelievably telling as they show the levels of obesity and usage of food stamps. Talk about a correlation. I think it'd be common sense if they made it so food stamps could only purchase good food. We'd see a lot more slimmer people in America. Now finally, moving on to the last point. Allowing kids easy and plentiful access to sports and extracurricular. This is the most simple to solve. More funding needs to be allocated to these institutions. I used to work as a PE teacher myself, and I really believe sport and exercise is important for all children's upbringing. Anyway, those are just a couple of the ways we can incentivize couples to raise strong and healthy children in the next generation. If you have any thoughts about these ideas, I'd really like to hear those in the comments below. I also might make a follow-up video on my second channel, and the link will be in the description. Lastly, also make sure you press the like button on your way out, as it all very much helps the YouTube algorithm.